There are some children who learn very early that the world is not a kind place. They learn it not from books or movies, but from the looks on people's faces, from the way adults sigh when they speak, from the laughter of other kids that cuts deeper than any words ever could. Theo was one of those children. He was born in a small town in Tennessee, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and news travels faster than the wind. His mother, Delia, raised him alone in a trailer at the edge of town. His father had left before Theo turned 2, and all that remained of him was an old photograph tucked inside a shoebox under his mother's bed. From the outside, Theo looked like any other boy. Brown eyes, messy hair, a quiet face that rarely smiled. But when he opened his mouth to speak, something happened. His words got stuck. They twisted and repeated and refused to come out the way he wanted them to. The doctors called it a stutter. The kids at school called it something else. They called him broken. By the time Theo was 8 years old, he had learned that silence was easier than speaking. Every time he tried to answer a question in class, the other children would giggle. Some would make fun of him openly. Others just stared, which somehow felt even worse. His teachers were kind, but their kindness came with pity, and Theo could always see it in their eyes. That look that said they felt sorry for him, that look that made him feel small. So, he stopped talking. Not completely, of course. He still spoke to his mother when they were alone. He still whispered answers when teachers called on him, though his voice was so quiet that most of them eventually stopped asking. But in the world outside his home, Theo became invisible. He sat in the back corner of every classroom, pressed against the wall like he was trying to disappear into it. And most of the time, it worked. People stopped noticing him. Teachers forgot to include him in group activities. Students walked past him, like he was part of the furniture. The corner became his place, his hiding spot, his tiny piece of safety in a world that seemed too loud and too fast and too cruel. At home, things were different, but not easier. His mother worked at the local poultry plant, pulling long shifts that started before sunrise and ended after dark. She loved Theo more than anything in the world. But love doesn't pay bills. Love doesn't put food on the table. So she worked and worked. And Theo spent most of his evenings alone. He didn't mind the silence of the empty trailer. In fact, he preferred it. There was no one to judge him there. No one to laugh at the way he talked. No one to make him feel like something was wrong with him. He would sit by the window and watch the sky change colors as the sun went down. And sometimes he would hum little songs to himself, melodies that came from somewhere deep inside him, tunes that had no words, because words had always been his enemy. School was a different story. Every morning, Theo would walk through the front gates of Ridgemont Elementary with his head down and his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He knew the rules of survival by now. Don't make eye contact. Don't draw attention. Don't give anyone a reason to notice you. But children can be cruel in ways that don't need a reason. There was a group of boys in his grade who had made it their mission to remind Theo of his place. They would bump into him in the hallways and call him names. They would mimic his stutter in high-pitched voices while their friends laughed. Once, they stole his backpack and threw it into the dumpster behind the cafeteria. Theo spent his entire lunch period digging through garbage to find it. And when he finally walked back into class with his clothes stained and smelling, the teacher just shook her head and told him to sit down. No one asked what happened. No one ever did. The worst part wasn't the bullying. Theo had grown used to that, the way a person grows used to a scar. The worst part was the loneliness. It was the feeling of sitting in a room full of people and knowing that not a single one of them saw him. It was watching other kids form friendships and share jokes and make plans for the weekend, while he sat alone under the old oak tree during recess, picking at the grass and pretending he didn't care. But he cared. He cared so much that sometimes it felt like his chest would crack open from the weight of it. His mother noticed the change in him even though she was hardly ever home. She saw how he stopped talking about school, how he flinched when she asked about his day, how his eyes had lost something bright that used to be there. One night, she came home earlier than usual and found him sitting on the floor of his room, staring at nothing. She sat down beside him and pulled him into her arms, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, she whispered into his hair, "I know it's hard, baby. I know the world doesn't always see you the way I do, but you got something special inside you. I don't know what it is yet, but it's there, and one day, people are going to see it. One day, they're going to hear you." Theo wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that there was something inside him worth finding. But at 8 years old, sitting in the corner of classrooms and hiding from bullies and eating dinner alone most nights, it was hard to imagine that things would ever be different. He didn't know that everything was about to change. He didn't know that somewhere out there, waiting in a dusty storage room of a community center, was a broken guitar with 2 missing strings. He didn't know that his hands, the same hands that trembled when he tried to speak, would one day create something beautiful. He didn't know that the silence he had wrapped around himself like armor would eventually break open to reveal a voice the world had never heard before. All he knew was that he was alone, that he was invisible, that no one was listening. But the thing about being invisible is this: sometimes, the people who go unnoticed are the ones with the most to say. Sometimes, the quietest voices carry the loudest truths. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one chance, one broken instrument in a forgotten room to change everything. Theo didn't know any of that yet. He was just a boy in a corner, waiting for something he couldn't name. And somewhere out there, that something was waiting for him too. The summer before 4th grade was the hottest one Theo could remember. The air hung thick and heavy over the town, and the sky seemed to press down on everything like a weight. Most kids spent their days at the public pool or running through sprinklers in their backyards. But Theo had no friends to swim with, and the trailer didn't have a yard. So, he wandered. He walked the dusty roads at the edge of town, kicking rocks and watching the heat shimmer off the pavement. He explored the woods behind the old church, where the trees grew so thick that the sunlight barely touched the ground. He sat by the creek and let the cold water run over his feet while dragonflies danced above the surface. It was a lonely summer, but Theo had grown used to lonely. One afternoon in late July, the sky turned dark without warning. Clouds rolled in fast and angry, and before Theo could make it home, the rain came down in sheets. Thunder cracked so loud, it shook his bones. He ran as fast as his legs could carry him, looking for any place to take shelter. That's when he saw the community center. It was an old brick building at the end of Main Street, the kind of place that always seemed half forgotten. Theo had passed it 100 times, but never gone inside. He didn't know what happened in there, and he didn't really care. All he knew was that it had a roof and walls, and right now, that was enough. He pushed through the front door, dripping wet and shivering. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old coffee. A few elderly folks sat at a folding table, playing cards. They glanced up at him, then went back to their game. No one asked who he was or why he was there. No one seemed to care. Theo stood near the entrance for a while, watching the rain pound against the windows. He didn't want to go back out, but he didn't know where to go inside either. So he started walking, just to have something to do. The building was bigger than it looked from the outside. There were rooms with stacked chairs and dusty chalkboards, a small kitchen with a humming refrigerator, and a hallway that seemed to go on forever. At the very end of that hallway, Theo noticed a door that was slightly open. A thin strip of light spilled out onto the floor. He didn't know why he walked toward it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was boredom. Or maybe it was something else. Something deeper, pulling him forward, like a thread tied around his heart. The room was small and cluttered. Boxes were stacked against the walls. Old decorations from holidays long past were piled in the corners. Folding chairs leaned against each other like tired friends. And there, half buried beneath a tangle of extension cords and faded tablecloths, was a guitar. Theo froze. He had seen guitars before, of course. On television, in music videos, in the hands of country singers, his mother sometimes listened to on the radio, but he had never touched one. He had never held one in his own two hands. Slowly, he walked over and pulled it free from the pile. It was old and scratched, with a crack running along the side of the body. Two of the strings were missing, and the ones that remained were rusted and dull. It looked like something that had been forgotten a long time ago, but to Theo, it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He sat down on the cold floor, cradling the guitar in his lap like it was something precious. His fingers brushed against the strings, and a sound came out. It was rough and out of tune, but it was a sound, a real sound, something that came from his hands instead of his mouth, something that didn't stutter. Theo stayed in that room until the storm passed. He plucked at the remaining strings, learning how they felt beneath his fingertips. He didn't know how to play. He didn't know the first thing about music. But something about holding that guitar made him feel different. Lighter. Like a door had opened inside him that he didn't even know was there. When the rain finally stopped, he tucked the guitar under his arm and walked out of the community center. No one stopped him. No one asked where he had found it. The old folks at the card table didn't even look up. He carried it all the way home, holding it close to his chest like a secret. That night, Theo sat on his bed and stared at the guitar for hours. He didn't know what to do with it. He didn't have money for new strings. He didn't have a teacher. All he had was this broken instrument and a feeling he couldn't explain. The next morning, he walked to the public library. It was a small building with creaky floors and shelves that smelled like paper and time. Theo had been there a few times before, mostly to escape the heat or avoid the bullies who roamed the streets in summer. But this time, he had a purpose. He found the music section in the back corner. There weren't many books, but there were enough. He pulled out everything he could find about guitars, about chords, about how to read music. He checked out 3 books and a VHS tape that promised to teach beginners how to play in 30 days. For the next 2 weeks, Theo did nothing but study. He learned the names of the strings. He learned how to tune them, even though 2 were missing. He learned how to press his fingers against the fretboard, how to strum with his other hand, how to make sounds that actually sounded like something. It was hard. Harder than anything he had ever done. His fingers ached. The tips of them cracked and bled. The strings left grooves in his skin that stung when he washed his hands. Some nights, he wanted to throw the guitar across the room and give up. But he didn't, because every time he played, something happened. The noise in his head went quiet. The shame and the fear and the loneliness, all of it faded into the background. When his fingers moved across the strings, Theo felt like he was speaking for the first time in his life. Not with words that got stuck in his throat, but with something purer, something that came straight from his heart. His mother noticed the change. She came home one evening and found him sitting on the floor, bent over the guitar, his face tight with concentration. She stood in the doorway and watched him for a long moment. When he finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes. "Where did you get that?" she asked softly. Theo told her about the storm, the community center, the dusty room with the forgotten instrument. He spoke slowly, the words tripping over themselves, as they always did. But this time, he didn't stop. He kept going until the whole story was out. His mother sat down beside him and took his hand. "Play something for me," she said. Theo hesitated. He was still learning. He still made mistakes. But the look in his mother's eyes told him it didn't matter. She wasn't expecting perfection. She just wanted to hear him. So he played. It was a simple melody, just a few notes strung together in a pattern he had made up himself. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't complicated. But It was his. It had come from somewhere inside him, from a place that words could never reach. When he finished, his mother was crying, but she was smiling too. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "That was the most beautiful thing I ever heard." A few weeks later, on Theo's 9th birthday, his mother surprised him with a gift. She had picked up extra shifts at the plant, working until her back ached and her feet swelled. But she had saved enough to buy him a guitar from the pawn shop across town. It was old and scratched, just like the first one. But it had all 6 strings, and when Theo strummed it, the sound was clear and bright and full of possibility. He held it against his chest and closed his eyes. And for the first time, in as long as he could remember, he felt like he had a voice. Not the kind that came from his mouth, the kind that came from his soul. 2 years passed, and Theo kept playing. He played in the morning before school, his fingers moving across the strings while the sun came up outside his window. He played in the evening after his mother left for her night shifts, filling the empty trailer with melodies that kept the loneliness away. He played until his fingers knew the fretboard better than his own face, until the music came as naturally as breathing. But he never played for anyone except his mother. At school, nothing had changed. Theo was still the boy in the corner, still invisible, still silent. The other kids had grown taller and louder, but they hadn't grown kinder. They still whispered when he walked past. They still laughed when he stumbled over his words. And Theo had learned to expect nothing different. He was in 5th grade now, 10 years old, and he had accepted that this was just how things were. Some people were meant to be seen. Others were meant to fade into the background. He had made peace with being the second kind, or at least, he told himself he had. The truth was harder to admit. Deep down, in a place he didn't like to visit, Theo still wanted what every child wants. He wanted to matter. He wanted someone to look at him and see something worth noticing. He wanted to walk into a room and not feel like a ghost. But wanting something and believing you can have it are 2 very different things. Spring came early that year, and with it came the announcement that made Theo's stomach drop. The annual talent show. Every year, Ridgemont Elementary held a show in the gymnasium where students could sing, dance, tell jokes, or perform whatever talent they thought they had. It was the biggest event of the school year, and everyone talked about it for weeks. Kids practiced in the hallways. Groups formed to rehearse dance routines. The popular ones bragged about what they were going to do and how they were going to win. Theo wanted no part of it. The thought of standing on that stage, in front of the whole school, made his chest feel tight. He could barely speak in class without his words falling apart. How could he ever perform in front of hundreds of people? The idea was impossible. Ridiculous. He pushed it out of his mind and tried to pretend the talent show didn't exist. But the universe had other plans. On the night of the show, the gymnasium was packed. Parents filled the bleachers. Teachers lined the walls. Students buzzed with excitement, their voices echoing off the high ceiling. Theo sat in the back corner, as far from the stage as he could get. He had only come because attendance was required. He planned to sit quietly, watch the performances, and slip out the moment it was over. His guitar was with him, tucked inside its case beneath his seat. He brought it everywhere now, like a security blanket. It made him feel safe, even if he never intended to play it in public. The show started, and one by one, students took the stage. A group of girls performed a dance routine to a pop song. A boy told jokes that made some people laugh and others groan. 2 sisters sang a duet, their voices blending together in a way that made the audience clap along. Theo watched from his corner, invisible as always. Then something went wrong. About halfway through the show, the speakers crackled and popped. The music cut out. A boy who had been about to lip-sync to a famous song stood frozen on stage, his mouth open but no sound coming out. The crowd murmured in confusion. Teachers rushed to the side of the stage, huddling around the sound equipment. Minutes passed. The crowd grew restless. Kids started whispering and laughing. Parents checked their watches. It was chaos. And then Theo felt a hand on his shoulder. He looked up and saw a woman standing over him. She was younger than most of the teachers, with kind eyes and curly hair pulled back in a loose bun. Her name was Mrs. Callahan, and she was the new music teacher. Theo had never spoken to her, not once. But he had noticed her. He had noticed the way she smiled at everyone, even the kids that other teachers ignored. He had noticed how she left her classroom door open during lunch, playing piano for anyone who wanted to listen. And more than once, Theo had stood outside that door, hidden around the corner, letting the music wash over him. Now she was looking right at him, and there was something in her eyes. Something urgent. "You play guitar, don't you?" she asked. Theo's heart stopped. How did she know? He had never told anyone at school. He had never played a single note where anyone could hear. But Mrs. Callahan just smiled, like she already knew the answer. "I've seen you carrying that case," she said. "And I've heard you humming in the hallways. You hum melodies that don't exist on any radio. That means you're creating them yourself." Theo didn't know what to say. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Mrs. Callahan knelt down so they were eye to eye. Her voice was soft now, gentle. "We need someone to fill the time while they fix the speakers. Just a few minutes. You don't have to sing. You don't have to say a word. Just play." Theo shook his head. His hands were trembling. The thought of walking up to that stage made him feel like he might be sick. "I can't," he whispered. "I can't do it." Mrs. Callahan didn't look away. She didn't sigh or roll her eyes or give up like other adults always did. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand over his. "I know you're scared," she said. "I know you've spent a long time trying to be invisible. But I see you. Theo, I've always seen you, and I think there's something inside you that the world needs to hear." Theo felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. No one had ever talked to him like that. No one had ever looked at him like he was something more than a broken boy with a broken voice. "You don't have to do this for them," Mrs. Callahan continued. "Do it for yourself. Do it because you deserve to be heard. Just once. Just this once." The gymnasium was loud with noise. Kids were getting impatient. Parents were starting to stand up. On the stage, teachers were still scrambling with wires and buttons, and Theo made a decision. He didn't know where it came from. Maybe it was Mrs. Callahan's words. Maybe it was all those nights alone in his room, playing for no one. Maybe it was the weight of 10 years of silence pressing down on him, begging to be released. He reached under his seat and pulled out his guitar case. Mrs. Callahan's face lit up. She helped him stand and walked with him toward the stage. Every step felt like walking through water. His legs were heavy. His heart was pounding so hard, he could hear it in his ears. The crowd noticed him approaching. Whispers spread like fire. "Who is that? Is that the kid who doesn't talk? What's he doing?" Theo climbed the steps to the stage. The lights were bright, brighter than he expected. He could barely see the faces in the audience, but he could feel them. Hundreds of eyes, all staring at him, waiting, judging. He sat down on a stool at the center of the stage. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely open his guitar case. But he managed. He pulled out the guitar his mother had given him. The one with the scratches and the worn frets and the strings he had replaced a dozen times. The gymnasium fell quiet. Not out of respect, but out of confusion. No one knew what to expect from the silent boy in the corner. Theo closed his eyes. He took a breath, and then he began to play. The first note was shaky. Theo's fingers trembled as they pressed against the strings. The sound that came out was thin and uncertain, like a voice afraid to speak. He kept his eyes closed, too terrified to look at the crowd. He could feel their stares burning into him. He could hear the silence, thick and heavy, waiting for him to fail. For a moment, he thought about stopping. He thought about putting the guitar down, walking off the stage, and disappearing back into his corner where he belonged. That's what the old Theo would have done. That's what everyone expected him to do. But then something happened. He thought about his mother. He thought about all those nights she came home exhausted, her hands rough and her back aching, just to keep a roof over their heads. He thought about the guitar she had saved for months to buy him, working extra shifts until her body screamed for rest. He thought about the way she looked at him when he played, like he was the most precious thing in the world. He thought about Mrs. Callahan, the only person at school who had ever really seen him, the only one who believed there was something inside him worth hearing. He thought about all the years of silence, all the words that got stuck in his throat, all the times he wanted to speak but couldn't, wanted to scream but didn't, wanted to tell the world that he was more than a broken boy with a broken voice. And somewhere deep inside him, a door opened. Theo's fingers stopped shaking. His shoulders relaxed. His breathing slowed. And when he played the next note, it was different. It was clear. It was strong. It was real. The melody began to flow. It wasn't a song he had learned from a book or copied from the radio. It was something he had created himself. In all those lonely hours in his room, it was a melody born from silence, from sadness, from years of feeling invisible. But it was also something else. It was hope. It was longing. It was the sound of a heart that had been locked away for too long, finally finding a way to speak. The notes climbed and fell like waves on a shore. They whispered and roared, gentle one moment and powerful the next. Theo's fingers danced across the strings with a grace that seemed impossible for a 10-year-old boy. But this wasn't about age. This wasn't about skill. This was about truth, and the truth was pouring out of him like water from a broken dam. In the audience, something shifted. The whispers stopped. The restless movement stilled. Parents who had been checking their phones slowly lowered them. Teachers who had been fixing the speakers turned around and stared. Children who had spent years ignoring Theo, laughing at him, treating him like he didn't exist, now sat frozen in their seats. No one moved. No one spoke. No one even breathed. Because what they were hearing wasn't just music. It was a story without words, told through 6 strings and 2 hands, and a heart that had been silent for far too long. In the 3rd row, a little girl started to cry. She didn't know why. She was only 7 years old, too young to understand the pain behind the melody. But she felt it. She felt it in her chest, in her bones, in some deep part of her that words could never reach. Beside her, her mother pulled her close and cried too. Near the back of the gymnasium, one of the boys who had bullied Theo for years sat completely still. His face was pale. His hands gripped the edge of his seat. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew one thing for certain. He had been wrong. He had been so terribly, terribly wrong. And in the far corner of the bleachers, hidden in the shadows, stood a woman in a worn jacket and tired shoes. She had rushed straight from work, still smelling like the factory, still wearing her hairnet. She had almost missed the show entirely, but something had told her to come. Something had pulled her here, to this moment, to this place. Delia watched her son play, and her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Not from sadness, from pride, from joy, from the overwhelming realization that the boy she had raised alone, the boy the world had overlooked, the boy who couldn't speak without stumbling, had found a voice more beautiful than anything she had ever heard. Tears streamed down her face. She didn't wipe them away. On stage, Theo played on. He didn't know how long the song lasted. Time had lost all meaning. There was only the music, only the melody, only the feeling of finally being heard. He played every emotion he had ever buried, every tear he had cried alone, every wish he had whispered into the darkness. It all came out through his fingers, through the strings, through the air itself. And when the final note rang out, soft and sweet and full of something that felt like peace. Theo opened his eyes. The gymnasium was silent. For one terrible heartbeat, he thought he had failed. He thought they were going to laugh at him. He thought he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Then someone started clapping. It was Mrs. Callahan, standing at the side of the stage, her hands coming together in a steady rhythm. Then another person joined. Then another. Then 10. Then 50. Then the whole gymnasium erupted. People rose to their feet. Parents, teachers, students, all of them, standing and clapping and cheering like Theo had never heard before. The sound was deafening. It was overwhelming. It was everything he had ever dreamed of and more. But Theo barely noticed the crowd. His eyes had found his mother in the back of the room. She was standing with her hands pressed over her heart, tears still flowing down her cheeks. And even from across the gymnasium, he could see what she was saying. I told you they would hear you. Theo felt something crack open inside his chest. Not pain, not fear, something else. Something warm and bright and new. It was freedom. For 10 years, he had been trapped inside himself. Trapped by his stutter, by his shame, by the belief that he was broken beyond repair. But now, in this moment, with the applause washing over him like a wave, he understood something he had never understood before. He wasn't broken. He had never been broken. He had just been speaking a different language, a language that no one had bothered to learn. Until now, Mrs. Callahan was the first to reach him. She climbed onto the stage and wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight like he was something precious. I knew it, she whispered in his ear. I knew you had it in you. Then his mother was there, pushing through the crowd, climbing the steps, pulling him into an embrace so tight he could barely breathe. She was crying and laughing at the same time, her whole body shaking with emotion. My boy, she kept saying. My beautiful, beautiful boy. Around them, the applause continued. Students who had never spoken to Theo before were chanting his name. Teachers were wiping their eyes. Even the principal, a stern man who rarely smiled, was clapping with tears on his cheeks. And Theo stood in the middle of it all, holding his guitar, feeling like he had just woken up from a dream that had lasted his whole life. He had walked onto that stage as the invisible boy, the mute, the one no one listened to. He walked off as something else entirely. He walked off as Theo, the boy with the melody, and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after the talent show, Theo woke up thinking it had all been a dream. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the night before in his mind. The lights, the silence, the music pouring out of him like something alive, the applause that shook the walls. It seemed impossible. It seemed like something that happened to other people, not to boys like him. But then he saw his guitar leaning against the wall, and he knew it was real. Everything changed after that night. When Theo walked into school the next day, something was different. People looked at him, not through him, not past him, but at him. Kids who had ignored him for years suddenly wanted to talk to him. They asked about his guitar, about how he learned to play, about where the song had come from. For the first time in his life, Theo wasn't invisible. It was strange at first. Uncomfortable, even. He had spent so long hiding in corners that being seen felt like standing in the sun after years in a dark room. His eyes needed time to adjust. But slowly, carefully, he began to open up. He still stuttered when he spoke. That hadn't changed, and it never fully would. But somehow, it didn't seem to matter as much anymore. People listened differently now. They waited for him to finish his sentences instead of cutting him off. They looked at his face instead of looking away in embarrassment. They saw the person behind the stutter, the same person who had moved an entire gymnasium to tears with nothing but a guitar and a melody. Mrs. Callahan became his anchor. She stayed after school with him 3 days a week, teaching him things he couldn't learn from library books. She taught him how to read sheet music. She taught him about rhythm and timing, and the way a single pause could change the feeling of a song. She introduced him to composers and musicians he had never heard of, people who had poured their souls into their art, just like he did. But more than that, she believed in him. "You have a gift," she told him one afternoon, as the autumn light slanted through the windows of her classroom. "But gifts are just seeds. You have to water them. You have to work. You have to keep playing even when it's hard, even when you don't feel like it, even when you think nobody is listening." Theo nodded. He understood. "And one more thing," she said, leaning forward with a serious look in her eyes. "Never forget where you came from. Never forget what it felt like to be invisible, because one day, you're going to meet someone who feels the same way. And you're going to be the one who sees them." Those words stayed with Theo for the rest of his life. The years passed, and Theo kept growing. In middle school, he joined the band and learned to play other instruments. In high school, he started writing his own songs, melodies with lyrics that he sang softly, his stutter somehow smoothing out when the words were set to music. He performed at local events, at church gatherings, at small venues in neighboring towns. Each time, the crowd grew a little bigger. Each time, the applause lasted a little longer. His mother never missed a single performance. Delia still worked at the factory, still came home with aching feet and tired eyes. But whenever Theo had a show, she was there in the front row, wearing her best dress and clapping louder than anyone else. She had sacrificed everything for him, and now she got to watch him shine. "I always knew," she would say, squeezing his hand after every show. "I always knew you had something special." When Theo turned 16, something unexpected happened. A video of one of his performances found its way onto the internet. Someone in the crowd had recorded it on their phone and posted it, without telling him. Within a week, it had been viewed over 100,000 times. Within a month, it had reached millions. People from all over the country were watching the boy from Tennessee play his guitar. They shared his story. The story of the silent child, who had been overlooked and underestimated, who had found his voice through music. Messages poured in from strangers who said his playing had made them cry, had given them hope, had reminded them that everyone has something beautiful inside them waiting to be discovered. Theo didn't know how to handle it. He was just a kid from a trailer park who liked to play guitar. He wasn't famous. He wasn't special. He was just Theo. But the world disagreed. Opportunities began to arrive. Scholarship offers from music schools, invitations to perform at bigger venues, interviews with newspapers and radio stations. It was overwhelming, and there were moments when Theo wanted to retreat back into his corner, back to the safety of being invisible. But he didn't. He remembered what Mrs. Callahan had told him. He remembered that his gift was a seed, and seeds need sunlight to grow. He couldn't hide anymore. He had to step into the light, no matter how bright it felt. At 18, Theo was accepted into one of the best music colleges in the country on a full scholarship. The day the letter arrived, his mother held it in her hands and cried for an hour straight. It was the first time anyone in their family had ever gone to college. It was proof that dreams could come true, even for people who had nothing. Theo studied hard. He practiced harder. He surrounded himself with other musicians who pushed him to be better, who challenged him, who showed him how much he still had to learn. And through it all, he never forgot where he came from. He never forgot the boy in the corner. At 22, he released his first album. It was a collection of instrumental pieces, melodies that told stories without words. The title track was called Corner Boy, and it was the same song he had played at the 5th grade talent show all those years ago. The album wasn't a massive commercial hit, but it touched people in ways that numbers couldn't measure. It was played in hospitals and therapy offices. Teachers used it in classrooms to help anxious children calm down. Parents played it for their babies at night. And every time someone pressed play, a little piece of Theo's heart went out into the world. Today, Theo is a grown man with a career he never imagined possible. He has performed on stages around the world. He has composed music for films and television. He has won awards that sit on shelves he built with his own hands, in a house he bought for his mother. A real house, with a yard and a garden where she can finally rest. But the thing he is most proud of has nothing to do with fame or money or trophies. Every year, Theo visits schools in small towns across the country. He walks into gymnasiums and cafeterias and auditoriums, carrying his guitar, looking out at crowds of children who remind him of himself. He finds the kids in the corners, the ones with their heads down and their shoulders hunched, the ones who think they are invisible, the ones who have been told, in 1,000 different ways, that they don't matter, and he plays for them. Afterward, he tells them his story. He tells them about the stutter, the bullying, the loneliness. He tells them about the broken guitar in the dusty room and the teacher who changed his life. He tells them about the night he finally let himself be heard. And then he says the same thing every time. Everyone has a voice. It doesn't have to sound like words. It can be music, or art, or dance, or the way you build things, or solve problems, or care for people. Your voice is whatever makes you come alive. And the world needs to hear it. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday, if you keep going, someone will stop and listen. And when they do, everything will change. The children look up at him with wide eyes. Some of them don't believe him. Some of them are too hurt to hope. But a few of them, just a few, feel something stir inside their chests. A spark, a possibility, a door beginning to open. And that is enough. Because Theo knows better than anyone that all it takes is one moment. One person who sees you. One chance to be heard. He was the boy in the corner. Now he helps others find their way out.